Incredible sacrifice. How one poor farmer's touching act saved a Chinese widow and transformed a... John wiped the sweat from his brow as the merciless sun beat down on the cracked earth beneath his feet. Each day felt like an uphill battle, a dance with despair as he wrestled with dwindling yields and mounting debts. The recent loss of his father hung heavy, a shroud draping over the legacy he fought to preserve. As the crops withered, so did the hope he desperately clung to. A gnawing dread echoed in his gut, each thought a drumbeat of failure marking his isolation. Just as the debts piled as high as the dry cornstalks, a flicker of movement caught John's eye. She was a small woman, her features marked by worry, a foreignness that prickled the air around her. May, the widow seeking her son, had stepped into the town like a stranger lost in a fragile memory. The locals eyed her with suspicion, whispers carrying over the hot Mississippi wind. John felt an unexpected pang of recognition. Her pain mirrored his own, as he too stood poised on the precipice of despair. "Why are you doing this?" he asked softly, but already knew the answer even as the question left his lips. He had offered her a place on his farm, a risky gamble in his already precarious situation. The fervor of his neighbors' disapproval echoed in his mind, their faces tight with disdain. Mixing antique Chinese farming wisdom with his southern ways felt like a betrayal, yet the prospect of that knowledge ignited a smoldering ember of hope within him. Could this woman, with her alien ways, really transform his failing crop? He grappled with a whirlwind of conflict, the shadows of doubt entwined with a desperate longing for a solution. Before we continue, I need to tell you about something important that's happening. YouTube has been making changes to the system, and many people are losing notifications from channels they follow. If you're enjoying the content, click the bell and mark all notifications so you don't miss the next videos. And if you can leave a like, it really helps with reach. Seriously, it makes a difference. Oh, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I'm always curious to know who's on the other side of the screen. Now let's continue. As evening fell, the tender conversation over lemonade could not mask the rising storm clouds brewing both in the sky and within John's heart. His neighbors discussed loyalty, community, and tradition, while May shared stories of ancient farming techniques with the calm rhythm of a healer. Each word she spoke stirred an ache deep in his chest. What if he chose to embrace the change she represented? Would he be branded a fool among men? The growing divide between embracing new life or clinging to the old weighed heavily on his shoulders. Each choice fraught with consequence. When the storm finally arrived, its fury matched the turmoil within. Winds whipped through the trees as rain began to fall in thick sheets, as if nature itself were a reflection of the chaos he felt. Doubt twisted through him like a serpent, suffocating and relentless. Would standing with May tear him from the community he relied upon? Or would their collaboration foster new roads and healing? In that moment, the fate of his farm and the legacy of his family dangled like the lightning that illuminated the night sky. With fear clawing at his throat, John faced May, their lives converging in the storm's embrace. He stood at a crossroads, the weight of obligation pressing down alongside a flicker of hope. Could he stake his claim on both their futures? Or would he surrender to the solitude that awaited him if he turned his back? As thunder crashed above, John felt the last vestiges of control slip away. All that he had worked for and all that he might lose hung in the balance, the air charged with the collision of hope and dread. John's heart raced as each boom of thunder resonated in his chest, mirroring the storm within. Facing May was more than a confrontation with the approaching storm. It was a reckoning. The debate raged in him. Did he risk everything for an unproven method that might, just might, save his farm? "May," he said, his voice barely rising above the wind's howl, "what makes you so certain your methods will work here?" His skepticism hung in the air like the heavy rain. May met his gaze unflinching. "Because they are not just methods, they are a philosophy. They respect the earth, nourish it, and listen to its needs." She paused, her expression firm yet lined with fatigue, as if carrying a lifetime of knowledge on her shoulders. "We adapt. We grow." Her words had a penetrating quality, cutting through his unease and igniting a flicker of curiosity within. Maybe it was time to reconsider. Ignorance had shackled him long enough, and it was clear that his father's traditional methods had not prepared him for this moment. He recalled the lessons of failure etched into the soil beneath his feet. What if he could learn something new? As the rain poured down, drenching both of them, John took a step closer to May. "Teach me." The words tumbled from his mouth before he could catch them, instinct-driven and raw. The decision felt monumental, a deep-rooted acknowledgement that things had to change if he were to save his father's legacy. "Are you sure?" she asked, a flicker of hope sparking in her eyes. "The journey will not be easy. You may face disapproval, and the old ways are deeply ingrained." John thought of the neighbors' skepticism, the whispers. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration mingling with resolve. "I can't afford to lose everything. What choice do I have?" The vulnerability in his admission jolted him. "I will teach you the principles of Wu Wei. Effortless action, respect for nature," May replied, her voice almost soothing beneath the tempest. "But you must also embrace uncertainty. Trust in the process." As they stood there, rain drenching them, John felt like a seed buried beneath the soil, waiting for the right conditions to break through. He had spent too long clinging to what he knew, fearing the unknown. Change wasn't just necessary, it was the only way forward. The post-storm calm descended slowly, drowning the air in quiet anticipation. The cacophony had shifted, and as the rain eased, John absorbed the sense of damp earth and renewed life around him. A sliver of excitement cut through his anxiousness. In the days that followed, he dove into learning with May, forging a bond forged in shared labor as they adapted those ancient practices to his own land, redefining both the farm and himself in the process. But the struggles were real. John felt the weight of the community's scrutiny on his shoulders as rival farmers eyed him with disdain. They accused him of folly, of betraying the traditions that had sustained their families for generations. He grappled with frustration as old instincts clashed hard with May's new ideas. Underneath it all, he began to sense that growth required confrontation, not only with the land, but also with the expectations of those around him. One evening, as shadows lengthened, John stood at the edge of his fields, plants rooted in the promise of dawn yet to come. He inhaled deeply, tasting the future in the air, barely aware of the challenge ahead. A figure approached from the distance. It was Caleb, his neighbor who embodied tradition. The unspoken tension simmered, bringing with it a palpable challenge, and John braced himself for what was coming. "Why are you doing this, John?" Caleb demanded, accusing eyes locking onto him. "You know it's wrong." The moment hung heavy between them, daring John to reveal the truth about his ambitions, about the hope he was now chasing. The storm inside him had quelled, but the front line of his journey was just beginning. "What if I don't care what you think?" John countered, a defiance rising in his chest. The time had come to face the ramifications of his choices head-on, and as he squared his shoulders to meet Caleb's gaze, he felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. How far was he willing to go to defend his choices? A storm of thoughts swirled in his mind as the world around him remained tense with potential. As John faced Caleb, the intensity of the moment settled deep within him. Conviction clashed solidly with doubt. The application of May's teachings gnawed at his confidence. He was stepping into an unfamiliar arena, armed only with burgeoning knowledge and the resolve to redefine his place in the world. But how did one dismantle a lifetime of accepted norms? "Don't you see, Caleb?" John replied sharply, steeling himself against the weariness that his neighbor's words evoked. "What I'm doing is not just for me, it's for the land. It's for a future that doesn't look like the past." Caleb's brow furrowed, disbelief etched into his features. "You're throwing away everything your father built. This isn't some game. It's your life." John felt the weight of that accusation settle like lead in his stomach, but he refused to waver. He could almost hear May's voice urging him to remain unyielding, to trust in the change he had initiated. "Maybe it's time for the tradition to evolve." The world changes. Farming has changed. I need to learn how to adapt, or I'll lose it all. You're a fool, then, Caleb spat. The disdain in his voice lingered in the air like the overbearing humidity pressing down around them. And when this fails, the community won't stand with you. A chill of isolation ran through John. He knew the community's loyalty was contingent on adherence to established ways. Yet he felt an entirely new energy coursing through him, a growing awareness of the potential within change. The specter of failure loomed, yet the fear of stagnation gnawed more viciously at his resolve. Perhaps, John ventured, striving to steady the tremor in his voice, but what if I could do it differently? What if the old ways work? Caleb interrupted, his voice rising. If you keep straying, don't expect us to back you when it all goes south. With a deep inhale, John quashed the surge of frustration. He would not allow Caleb to pull him back into a corner. Instead, he thought of May's teachings, and he drew upon the essence of Wu Wei, acting without force, in harmony with nature. It was not just a philosophical stance. It was a challenge to embody that belief. If you can't see what I'm trying to do, then perhaps you'll just have to watch, John retorted, feeling the fire burn through him. As Caleb's glare intensified, John sensed his own limitations dissolve. He was the architect of his path, and whatever the outcome, it would be his to own. Control of the narrative, the stakes, and the journey now lay in his hands. The next evening brought heavy winds and rolling clouds. Rain would soon follow, washing away doubt along with the residue of Caleb's bitterness. May's voice echoed in his mind, filling in the spaces where courage began to bleed into fear. He prepared to try out new regenerative techniques on a small plot of land first. It would be a bold step, a declaration of intention to the land and to himself. In those silent moments before action, he gleaned clarity from the ancient trees that surrounded him, wise and unwavering. For the first time, John felt connected not just to the earth beneath him, but to the legacy he would forge, one built on understanding, resilience, and innovation. His hands moved deftly as he turned the soil, punctuating the rhythm of his heartbeat. Seeds planted would grow, nurtured by a philosophy and purpose he was still learning to embrace, but that felt irrevocably his. Before the rain drummed down, Caleb's words echoed in his thoughts. A warning, yes, but also motivation. How far would John go to prove that change could blossom in adversity? Standing there, anticipation thickening the air, he felt it. The unmistakable twitch of resolve pushing him forward, inviting him to execute a plan that would challenge the status quo and engage deeply with what it meant to be a steward of the land. As the first raindrops fell, drenching him in sweet promise, he caught a distant figure approaching amid the downpour. It was May. What plan did she have that would further challenge everything he was just beginning to understand? As May approached, the rain intensified, creating a symphony of sound that marinated the moment in something profound. Her presence offered John's restless mind an antidote for his swirling emotions, and the urgency of their recent conversation clung heavily in the air, a palpable tension bridged by unspoken possibilities. "John," she called, her voice cutting through the thunder with clarity. He stood, half covered in mud and rain, and met her gaze, finding embedded in it the depth of wisdom he had grown to trust. She reached him, shaking off droplets like a cat, and grasped his shoulder, grounding him. "I see you've begun," she said, her eyes flickering to the newly turned soil. "Yes," John replied, attempting to quell the swell of uncertainty that surfaced at her gaze. "I planted some seeds, following your teachings. I want to try regenerative practices, but..." The weight of Caleb's words lingers. May nodded knowingly. "It often does. Change is like the roots of an oak tree. It is strong because it has faced the storm. You must brace yourself for the winds that will not only come from outside, but from within." With every word, John felt the alignment of his conflicting convictions settle slightly. The prospect of innovation was daunting, yet the path ahead pungently called to him. How do I fortify my resolve? How do I cultivate confidence against such deep-seated doubt? Embrace it, she replied simply, as if it were obvious. Let doubt teach you. Every obstacle can be a teacher. If you understand its lessons, you can transform it into your strength. You can turn it into the fertilizer that nurtures your growth. As the clouds rolled overhead, John understood that May wasn't simply encouraging him to challenge Caleb's belief system. She was coaxing him to confront his internal doubts. But what if I fail? What if this is all misguided? Failures are stepping stones. You fear abandonment by your community, but every revolutionary step begins with solitude. Ask yourself, what is more terrifying than failing? The answer is stagnation. The sentiment bit into John's core. Beyond Caleb, beyond the farms that clung to the traditions of the past, he must consider something deeper, the irreversible choice to either grow stale or risk the unknown. Caleb's disdain could not dictate his worth or the land's potential. Caleb may see tradition as a fortress, John acknowledged, a fire igniting in his belly. But to me it feels like a cage. Exactly. You are forging new paths, but you're not abandoning the old entirely. You're integrating and transforming. Your father's legacy doesn't have to be discarded. It can be evolved. John's thoughts whirled like the rain-soaked wind. A vision of future possibilities painted itself vividly in his mind. A farm not just surviving but thriving through innovation, breathing life into the very soil that had been dulled by time-worn habits. He felt the euphoric pulse of potential, the heartbeat of resilience growing louder with each passing second. "What's next?" he asked, the deep echo of commitment burgeoning within him. "How do I enact this change meaningfully?" May pulled a small bundle from her satchel, unwrapping it to reveal diverse, vibrant seeds, their colors alive and bright. These are not just ordinary seeds. They represent the diversity of life. Plant these along with your others. Let them lead the way. Let your practice incorporate diversity not just in crops but in methods, philosophies, even in how you interact with the community. The act of sowing these seeds felt monumental. John sensed the seedlings represented not just growth in his fields but growth in himself, a promise of development that could redefine his identity and how the world viewed him. As the storm began to ebb, his heart swelled with newfound determination, the weight of Caleb's skepticism starting to dissipate. He could become a catalyst, tethering tradition and innovation with respect and courage. But just as John began to grasp the enormity of this challenge, a distant shout erupted from beyond the fields. Someone was calling for him, an urgent tone tinged with panic. What chaos awaited just outside the boundaries of his budding resolve? The urgency in the voice cutting through the rain seized John's attention. Instinctively, he turned from May, searching the horizon for the source of the distress. Each pulse of his heartbeat quickened his resolve, and his feet moved before his mind fully grasped the impending crisis. The chaotic world that awaited him just outside his tranquil place of introspection broke the symphony of the storm, pulling him into the rawness of reality. "Wait." May's hand gripped his arm firmly, grounding him once more. "Remember your intentions. Whatever chaos lies ahead, face it with the same courage you seek to cultivate in your practice." John nodded, the weight of her words anchoring him. He took a deep breath, feeling the muddy earth beneath him, a reminder of his purpose. But panic gnawed at his gut as he raced toward the sound, a torrent of thoughts tumbling through his mind. Was someone hurt? Did he have the ability to help? Reaching the edge of the field, he was met by the sight of a local woman, soles soaked and clothes clinging to her in the rain, her face twisted between fear and urgency. "John, it's Caleb," she shouted, voice trembling. "He's gone. He didn't come back from the storm." A rush of adrenaline surged through John. Caleb was no longer just the embodiment of tradition threatening to crush his hopes. He was a man, human, in distress. He didn't have the luxury to dwell on their philosophical differences now. This was about saving a life, not challenging a worldview. "How long ago?" John pressed, trying to suppress the concern knotting within him. Time had a cruel way of warping when lives were at stake. Half an hour. I think he went to check the barn. It's flooding. Every ounce of doubt left John as purpose flooded in. Come on, we need to move, he instructed her, sprinting toward the barn tucked in the distance while pulling her along. The thrum of rain masked the echo of their footsteps, but the anxiety in the air was thunderous. As they neared the barn, a wave of realization washed over him. Caleb, a man who represented all that had held John back, was now someone whose presence could mean life or death. What irony it was to feel this urgency to protect someone who had disregarded him for so long. Yet amid that chaos, John's resolve hardened. He couldn't afford to relent to bitterness. Something had changed within him. The barn loomed, dark and foreboding. Just as he set foot inside, a torrent of water surged toward him, lapping at his ankles, echoing a storm of its own. The challenge not only of the moment, but within himself. John scanned the dimly lit structure, eyes darting through shadows for signs of Caleb. "Caleb!" John called, each syllable blending with the sound of swelling water. He was now both their lifeline and his own moral compass, confronting both external and internal storms. Then he caught a glimpse of movement cramped against the corner, a figure struggling. "Caleb, I'm coming!" John shouted, slipping through the chaos to reach his father's rival. As he drew nearer, an involuntary dread tightened his chest. Why did his heart race more for this man than for the mutual disdain they shared? Caleb's eyes were wide, fear palpable. "Help me!" Grasping Caleb's arm was not just an act of rescue, it became an act of transformation. With each pull, he felt layers of resentment peel away, replaced by raw humanity. Here was man facing a true storm, and now John's resolve rose as he grappled with not just physical danger, but the remnants of fear that had held him captive for years. "Hold on," John urged, using his body to shield Caleb from the onslaught of rushing water as they maneuvered through the barn's chaos. With every step closer to safety, John realized he was redefining not only his relationship with Caleb amidst this turmoil, but also with himself. He could evolve beyond mere survival. He was stepping towards a future that held resilience, empathy, and growth. Exiting the barn, John looked back at the now flooded threshold, the sound of storm settling into a distant rumble. He had faced his adversary, not just in a physical encounter. He confronted the fear and doubt that resigned him to passivity. But just as clarity dawned, it shattered with the weight of mystery, for there, in the wild aftermath, a whisper of uncertainty haunted him. What would this act of courage mean for the fragile balance of his own identity? As they staggered on, breathless but alive, the echoes of their prior conflicts would soon return, forcing him to ponder not just how he could save a life, but how this act might shape his own. The cold rain seemed to echo the tumult in John's heart as he and Caleb emerged from the barn, relief mingling with confusion over the emotional tidal wave of the past hour. The world outside felt starkly different. The chaos inside the barn had stripped away his fears, yet here he stood, a subtle tension pulsing within him. He had acted undeniably, yet what was left of the man he had been before this moment? Caleb leaned against a fence, panting heavily, his face pale. The storm clouding the sky mirrored the uncertainty in John's mind. He had saved a life, Caleb's life, but at what cost to his own sense of self? There was no denying the urge to reflect on his upbringing, the traditions that had dictated his relationship with this man. This flood had washed away previous enmities, but would it create a new path forward, or would it only leave behind remnants of conflict unresolved? "Thank you," Caleb croaked, his voice raspy yet tinged with genuine gratitude. John stared at him, battling empathy and resentment. Gratitude was foreign territory. It stirred the foundations of his own identity. John had always been the son of the rival farmer, the outsider struggling for acceptance. He was not sure how to integrate this sudden change in his perception of Caleb, not to mention the implications it had for his future. Caleb muttered something about the other fields needing immediate attention, floundering back to a familiar posture of authority. Yet somehow, he looked smaller, vulnerable. John's mind, once entrenched in bitterness, flitted through the unexpected breadth of compassion. Was it possible to offer him support despite their history? "I'll help," John offered tentatively. The statement felt like a seismic shift, not just toward Caleb but his own rigid notions of identity. It was a decision that linked him not just to Caleb as a farmer, but to him as a person. The old barn that had been a backdrop to constant tension now stood as a monument of reconciliation. As they moved toward the next field to drain the rising waters, John felt a newfound determination surface. The rain began to lighten, and with each shoe squelch in the mud, he pondered his purpose beyond the moment. Perhaps it could expand to encompass a meaningful relationship with Caleb. There was manual labor ahead, an action John was trained for. He embraced the rhythm of work, the digging, the redirecting of water flow, the cooperation. The physical exertion cleared his mind, but his thoughts kept darting to what lay beneath the surface. The resentment was not gone. It lay dormant, awaiting the chance to manifest. "Why did you come after me?" Caleb's voice drew him from the thought swirling through his head. "Given everything between us, I'd expect you to stand aside." John hesitated. The question pulled at him. Why indeed? "It's how people should act," he said finally, surprising even himself with the clarity of his conviction. "I refuse to lose the chance to do better." Caleb raised an eyebrow, surprise mingling with something resembling hope. "Better? So there's a chance for you? For us?" The way Caleb said "us" signaled uncharted territory, and John felt a spark of potential unfolding between them. The moment carried weight, the past clashing with an unpredictable future. As they continued their work in silence, with the sun finally breaking through the lingering clouds, John recognized that his life was not a series of defined roles, but rather a complex web of choices and relationships. This was his chance to define a new role, to step into a future where collaboration overrode rivalry. But even as they cleared the last remnants of water, a nagging question festered at the back of his mind. If he could reshape his identity in this small way, was he willing to confront the larger fears looming in his life? His family, their expectations? With that familiar sense of urgency building again, John wondered if he was ready to engage with the true storm raging within him. This isn't just about Caleb. It's about who he would become. What awaited him on the other side of this newfound resolve? The thought gripped him as he and Caleb surveyed the landscape ahead, realizing the storms might not be over just yet. The true confrontation between the man he wanted to be and the weight of his past was still alive, lurking. The air around John felt charged, almost electric, as he and Caleb stood amidst the remnants of their labor. He was ready to cast off the shadows that had haunted him. Raised in a world that thrived on rivalry and division, John sensed an awakening within him. This moment could indeed mark a pivot point, revealing not just his capacity for compassion but, crucially, his ability to redefine what mattered most in his life. "Let's check the east field next," Caleb said, motioning with a tentative smile. It was a subtle but significant shift in their dynamic, one that felt both invigorating and terrifying. John nodded, swallowing his trepidation. Their shared labor had begun to erode the invisible barrier that had long dictated their interactions. As they walked to the east field, John was acutely aware of an inner monologue accelerating toward a crucial understanding. He had spent years convinced that he had to prove himself, to stand as the better farmer, the better man than Caleb, someone who could never rise above the weight of his family's history. He glanced sideways at Caleb, still grappling with his own identity in the wake of illness and recent vulnerability. Who had he been to judge another man, when his own shortcomings laid bare before him? "What do you think about expanding into more sustainable practices?" John asked, surprising himself with the fluidity of his curiosity. He had never broached such things before. The farm was always a battleground, not a place for collaboration. Caleb's brows furrowed, but John pressed on, letting his thoughts flow. "I've been reading about it. It could help us both, even with the heavy rains." Caleb paused, his eyes narrowing while considering John's proposition. "You really want us to work together?" His incredulity was palpable, but something in Caleb's tone shifted. revealing a flicker of possibility. "I think it might be time for us to move past what's been. This rivalry hasn't served either of us," John responded earnestly, feeling the weight of his declaration settle in the crisp air. The silence that followed felt heavy, yet liberating. As they approached the east field, a series of tall crops bowed under the weight of the lingering rain. The fresh smell of earth mixed with desperation fueled John's determination that surged as he realized how deeply rooted the conflict had been in their lives. Who could they become if they acknowledged their shared ambitions rather than individual losses? Yet, just as he felt emboldened, unease prickled at the back of his mind. Would their families allow such changes? John could envision the scorn of his parents, condemning him for associating with the enemy. It was one thing to entertain cooperation in theory, but did he possess the fortitude to confront those who had shaped his beliefs? Turning to Caleb, a sudden fear pierced him. What if he couldn't make this work? Not just with Caleb, but in an entire community that might reject him? What about our families? The hesitation slipped from his lips, unguarded. He hadn't anticipated discussing the burden of legacy so soon. Caleb frowned, his expression caught between reluctance and resolve. "I suppose they'll have to adapt too if we're serious about this," he said cautiously. Their words lingered, the reality of their choices weighing heavy. In that moment, John understood. This was more than just a discussion about farming practices. It was a crossing point where their individual pasts could either continue to define them or dissolve into something unexpected. A glance toward Caleb hinted at a shared understanding, yet the uncertainty shadowing their exchange loomed larger than either anticipated. Was confronting the expectations of their families too steep a price for growth? Taking a breath, John felt the struggle within intensify. He could almost hear the pull of tradition versus the hope of collaboration in a partnership. Each beat of his heart was a reminder of the choices that lay ahead, examining not only what he stood to gain, but what he stood to lose. As they stepped deeper into the field, John knew the true test awaited him. Would he take the risk to forge a new path, or would he allow the specter's shadow to continue dictating his fate? A rush of adrenaline surged through him. The real battle loomed. Could he truly break free from the chains of expectation and embrace the change that felt necessary? Just then, a distant rumble of thunder echoed ominously, a stark contrast to the sun-drenched field around them. It felt like a prophecy whispering of storms yet to come, storms brewing not just in nature, but in the lives they each held dear. With determination set in motion, John understood one thing. A confrontation lay ahead, not with Caleb, but with everything he thought he knew about loyalty, identity, and what it meant to truly stand for oneself. The sun hung high in the afternoon sky, casting long shadows across the east field as John and Caleb surveyed the flooding remnants of their earlier work. The air was thick with the scent of wet soil and burgeoning growth, yet an underlying tension coursed through John, clawing at his resolve. He had made a decision. He would push forward into the unknown, but the fear of familial condemnation left a lingering taste of doubt. "We should probably get these crops sorted out," Caleb suggested, pulling John from his spiraling thoughts. There was a hint of urgency in his voice, a reminder that time was of the essence in their precarious situation. Yet John's mind remained tangled in contemplation. As they worked side by side, John felt the consistent rhythm of their labor soothing his anxieties, allowing him to focus on practicalities over fears. He grabbed a hoe and began to retill the soil, every movement revitalizing his sense of purpose. With each strike, memories of his father's sharp words and conditional love flickered like shadows in his mind, urging him to retreat. But with every swing, he contemplated the kind of man he wanted to become. He observed Caleb beside him, a man who had been stripped of pretenses and vulnerability, and the juxtaposition weighed heavily on John. This was no longer about rivalry. This was about redefining his essence against the backdrop of his upbringing. "Do you ever think about what it would be like to pursue something different?" John asked, surprising not only Caleb but also himself. This was deeper territory, a leap from farming disputes to vulnerable questions about dreams. Caleb paused mid-action, as if considering the gravity of John's words. You mean like actually trying new crops or passing on the family traditions? He studied John's face, searching for clarity. More than that. I mean, what happens when cultivating something new isn't just about the crops, when it's about who we are? The sincerity in John's voice resonated, striking a chord he had never fully revealed to anyone before. Caleb lowered his hoe, allowing the weight of John's question to settle. I suppose it's easy to get lost in what's expected, isn't it? But it's scary to break away from that. John nodded, feeling a kinship in their shared trepidation. But isn't it scarier to stagnate? If we only ever live out what others want for us, what's the point? He took a deep breath, steeling himself against the internal storm that threatened to drown him. As they resumed working, a thought raced through John's mind. Was he prepared for the inevitable confrontation with his family? There would be no guarantees of acceptance or understanding, but the possibility of forging a path built on collaboration ignited a flame within him. Could he illustrate that growth was possible outside the rigid confines of tradition? Caleb looked up, catching John's intensity. You really believe we can do this, don't you? He asked, half hopeful and half doubtful. I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this? John replied, gesturing broadly to the field that was both a battlefield and a sanctuary. Just then, a sharp crack of thunder boomed, warning them of the impending storm, but John felt an energizing exhilaration surge through him. He would face the tumult, not just of the weather but of those who would oppose him, as family loyalty clashed with his desire for authenticity. Together they finished the retiling work, the thunder rolling in like a battle drum, each sound echoing against the walls of their decisions. This muscle and sweat were more than just physical labor. They were steps toward liberation. A primal urge stirred inside John, urging him to take the next leap. Suddenly, the idea consumed him. If he spoke to the community, to his family, about this new partnership, perhaps they could redefine the landscape of their rivalries. He felt the gravity of what lay ahead, the need for confrontation with not only his family, but society's expectations. The path he envisioned was one of connection and growth, a transformation that demanded sacrifice. But as the rain began to fall, he couldn't shake the nagging fear. Would the storms of opposition drown out the seeds of hope he sought to plant? With fingers tense around the hoe, John realized he was standing at the precipice of change. The moment was approaching when he would have to flesh out his vision into something grounded, something that could withstand the rain. What would he need to do to truly win this battle for his future? As darkness descended with the storm, the answer felt close, yet tantalizingly out of reach. He resolved to dig deeper, both in the soil and within himself. There was more to uncover, more to confront. The real question loomed closer now. Would he have the courage to voice his truths when the time came? Or would the tempest tear apart the fragile alliance he was beginning to forge? John awoke early the next morning, the remnants of the storm leaving the air crisp and the ground a rich tapestry of mud and potential. As sunlight filtered through the leaves, illuminating the dew-kissed landscape, a sense of determination filled him. Today was not just another day but a crucial moment for the next chapter of his life, one that demanded clarity and action. Fingers trembling, he sat up, recalling the conversation with Caleb, the words lingering in his mind like a seed waiting for rain. What would he say when he gathered his family? The fear of confrontation lay heavy within him, yet it was mixed with a bubbling confidence that had emerged from their labor, not simply with the earth, but with his own heart. Breakfast passed in a daze, the usual banter between family members muted, overshadowed by the brewing storm within him. With every bite, he thought about the effects of his decision, a swell of anxiety clashing against the fervent desire for change. Would their reactions be filled with disdain or an unexpected understanding? He leaned over the wooden table, feeling the grain dig into his palm. It was time to reclaim his narrative, to state unequivocally who he was becoming. He needed the strength of his convictions to spill forth, much like the seeds he planned to sow into their own fields, ideas rooted in shared responsibility. cultivating unity instead of division. After breakfast, each step down the dirt path felt monumental. It was not simply his feet moving, it was John stepping into the role of advocate for change, reminiscent of a knight preparing for battle. With Caleb by his side, he forged ahead toward his family's homestead. The visual of it loomed in the distance, an imposing structure that felt both familiar and foreign. As they reached the porch, the air thickened. John's heart raced, each pulse urging him to voice his truth. "Caleb, this feels different. What if they don't see this the way we do?" He glanced at him, searching for reassurance, but Caleb's expression mirrored his own uncertainty. "They might surprise you," he replied, exuding a quiet strength. "Sometimes it takes one brave person to push open the door for others to walk through." Taking a deep breath, John turned the doorknob and entered the bustling household filled with laughter and love. Though today John sensed veils of ignorance that needed lifting. His mother was dusting the kitchen while his father inspected the crops through the window, a routine brimming with predictability. "Hey, can we all sit down for a moment?" John instructed, his voice steadier than he felt. His family's laughter faded, concern replacing the merriment as they directed their focus toward him. The conversation flowed like a river breaching its banks. John laid out his vision, intertwining the personal and the communal as he spoke about partnership with Caleb and the innovative paths they could explore together. As he spoke, doubt about his family's reaction morphed into a crescendo of anticipated confrontation. "The way we've always done things isn't the only way," he stated, his words igniting a flicker of disbelief in his father's eyes. "We can redefine who we are, not just as farmers, but as a family." His father's brow furrowed, flickers of disappointment mixed with doubt flashing across his face. "You want to throw away everything we've built? The traditions that define us?" Each objection, each question from his father cut through him. Yet, as he felt the sting, something shifted. Instead of retreating, he stood firm, recognizing this was an inevitable part of the process, a rite of passage toward his own authentic self. "I'm not suggesting we forget our roots, but I can't just follow an outdated path. There is a different future out there waiting for us." As the confrontation escalated, voices rose and tensions mounted, revealing layers of buried emotions simmering beneath the surface. It was more than a disagreement. It was a confrontation between tradition and transformation, loyalty and autonomy. What he discovered about his father in those moments of heated exchange surprised him most. Underlying the anger was fear, the fear of losing the very fabric of their family. "I don't want to lose you, son," his father finally said, that vulnerability cracking through the steely facade. That moment crystallized in John's mind. He wasn't alone. They were tethered by blood and history, yet each of them longed to evolve. The storm had come, but it had also brought clarity, illuminating aspects of their own desires and fears. Realizing this, John pressed forward, determined to reforge their bond. "We can grow together, but it won't happen by clinging to the old ways. Let's walk this path side by side. Let's not just be defined by what was, but by what we could become." As he spoke, hope ignited within him, pushing back against the fear that had once loomed so large. The potential for cooperation glowed before him, both exhilarating and terrifying. However, in the depths of his heart, the shadows of what lay ahead lurked. Uncertainty about the decisions that would come next and the possibility of losing more than just a fight. Would this dialogue open doors, or would it slam them shut? The question lingered in the air, unspoken yet palpable, as both father and son faced the reality of what their defined roles entailed, standing on the brink of something wholly transformative. Would they be able to take the leap together? Or would unraveling truths tear apart the fragile foundation of their unity? The sun had begun its ascent over the horizon, painting the fields in golden hues, as John stood before his family's homestead, now a battleground of dreams, fears, and hope. The weight of the previous day's showdown with his father still clung heavily in the air, but beneath that heaviness, there surged a burgeoning resolve. Today would mark a significant turning point. It was time to transform the remnants of tradition into a tapestry of innovation and unity. After breakfast, John gathered his family once more, the tension crackling like electricity. He felt the familiar pang of uncertainty, but he had crossed a line into something irrevocable, a commitment to change that would not only redefine his relationship with farming, but also reshape his connections, rooting them in authenticity rather than rivalry. "Mom, Dad," he began, voice steady but heart racing. "I've thought a lot about our farm, about our future. We can adapt our practices, but it's crucial we embrace collaboration, not opposition. I want to work alongside Caleb." The air thickened with anticipation, yet there was an undercurrent of something, and that was conviction. His father's brow furrowed deeply. "You think you can just dismiss decades of tradition?" came the rebuttal, strong but wavering under the weight of worry. John took a breath, steadying himself. He recalled his father's voice echoing across the fields in years past, proud yet bound by the shackles of legacy. There lay the heart of the struggle, a man grappling with change while ensnared in fear of loss. What if we didn't dismiss it? What if we used it as a foundation to build something new? John countered, the words flowing freely now, fortified by clarity, gained through experience and reflection. We can keep what is meaningful while embracing new methods that could enhance our crops and livelihood. His mother, who had been silent, leaned forward. The compassion in her gaze was illuminating. "John, change is frightening, but stasis can be even more detrimental. What you're suggesting may be our chance at survival." That simple sentiment resonated through the room. "It is our survival," John called out, using their collective fears to solidify a vision. "I want to honor the legacy without letting it suffocate progress. We can work together as a family enriched by new ideas and diversity, ultimately transforming our approach to farming. We don't have to have all the answers right now, but we can begin to experiment and learn together." Amid the buildup of emotion, something shifted in his father's demeanor. The rigidity softened slightly and the furrow in his brow released a flicker of understanding. "The world around us isn't standing still, but what you're asking requires a leap of faith." "Then let's leap together," John replied, the words taking flight as courage blossomed. "Let's cultivate not just our land but our connection. I've learned so much from Caleb, and that same knowledge can redefine what we know." The moment hung suspended between them, conflict intertwining with connection. John's heart raced. He steered through the echoes of disbelief he saw reflected in his father's eyes. Would this be the moment they shifted from division to unity, or would the past hold them hostage? John clutched the edge of the table, feeling the warmth of their discussions transform the familial energy. A blend of hope and ambition, rising through the cracks of tradition. With a boldness stemming from profound vulnerability, he clarified, "I want to create a legacy built on resilience, where we adapt rather than fear change." Silence enveloped the room, tension poised to snap when finally John's father set his gaze on him. "If we take this step, I need to trust that you will actively engage with these practices, and not just try for a season to appease the whims of curiosity. Commitment is essential." There was weight in his words, a challenge that underscored everything John desired. "Then let us begin," John asserted, emboldened. The anticipation in the air grew thicker with each passing moment, strings of possibility coiling tightly around them. Together. With that single word, the narrative began to shift, as if the shadows that had mounted over the years started to withdraw, revealing pathways marked not by fear, but by resilience. John witnessed the embodiment of hope reflected in his father's expression, the contraction of old fears loosening enough to allow breathing space for new ambitions. The realization that lay beneath this idea was immense. They were confronting the waves of expectation that threatened to drown them, and instead, now they were choosing to navigate those waters as a harbor of collaboration. As they mobilized their days toward a deep-rooted commitment to change, John often found himself reflecting on the roots he had planted. Each seed that had taken to the earth had become a testament to this journey. And as the crops burgeoned under their combined care, so too did their relationship bloom, filled with newfound understanding and purpose. Days turned into weeks with their harvests flourishing in unexpected ways. Conversations at dinner shifted too. Each meal hosted discussions around diversification of crops and sustainability practices that were not suffered under the shroud of tradition, but euphorically embraced as a community effort. Rejuvenation swept through their home, nurturing bonds reshaped not by mere survival, but by shared striving. Then came the season of the open house, a chance for their community to witness the fruits of John's labor alongside Caleb. As neighbors gathered, apprehensive yet intrigued, John felt a swell of pride harmonizing with his father's tentative approval. For the first time, opposition felt less like a barrier and more like a bridge leading them toward the next chapter. As John stepped up to address the crowd, he could feel their eyes, the weight of hopes and fears converging in that moment of vulnerability and strength. "What we've achieved here isn't just about new crops or innovative practices," he said, passion igniting his words. "It's about redefining our legacy, together." In that space, the visceral grip of acceptance began to take root. As he recounted their transformative journey, the way they bridged the past with the promise of tomorrow, John discovered newfound confidence in his voice. It rang loud and clear, echoed by the blessings of family and community. The applause that followed didn't just belong to John. They belonged to the collective effort that had bound them. He had transformed that raw fear of stagnation into flourishing persistence. What he achieved was not merely a new way of farming. It was a fundamental redefinition of who he was and who he aspired to be. An agent of change, a mentor to the future. As he embraced Caleb at the end of the event, there was nothing redundant about their partnership. Every strain of conflict and worry had merely enriched their journey. John stepped into the twilight, amidst the foliage now teeming with life, realizing he was no longer a solitary farmer but a steward of hope. Cultivating legacy not just through lineage but through heart and collaboration forged in authenticity. The arc of his story had come full circle, rooting in possibility and embracing the vibrancy of change. And in that moment of fulfillment, he knew. This was just the beginning. The real harvest was yet to come. Now is your turn. You need to subscribe now to catch the next exclusive emotional stories. Leave a like now to feed the algorithm and help others discover these transformative journeys. Comment your reactions and theories about John's incredible transformation. Don't wait even one more second to share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. True fans understand the importance of supporting these stories of perseverance and growth.